We continue now at the top of Daf Ayin Vav Amud Aleph Mesechet Kesubos. This is Kesubos Daf 76a. The Gemara here continues, Chada b'makom tarta. You have a situation when the husband only brings evidence that, let's say, she had a blemish during the time of the erisin. So you have two chazakas that are on her side. You only have one chazaka that's on his side, and therefore it's 1 against 2. V'chada b'makom tarti lo amrinan. And therefore, if it's 1 against 2, the two chazakas win. And therefore, in this situation, we're going to say that he has to pay her the ksuba money. Rashi over here says, Chada b'makom tarti, dehamid maman al cheskaso lo amrinan. We don't say that the money, he gets to keep the money because the chazak is that the money is with him. Then have a nami hachatarti. Then you would say it's 2 against 2. Devamakam chazaka degufa chazaka demamona lav klumi. Rashi says, in a situation where you have different chazakas of the guf, and her chazakas are outweighing his, the chazak of mammon, that doesn't really count. Now that's all true if he brings evidence that she had the blemish during the time of erisin. Then in that situation, she actually has 2 chazakas against his 1 chazaka, because again, she has a chazaka that at the time that before there was an erisin, she has a chazaka that she was born without the blemishes, and therefore it would seem that there was no blemish before the time of the erisin. And then there's an additional chazaka as well, and that's the chazaka that he would have known about it and he must have accepted it. And again, that's only against 1 chazaka, the chazaka that a person doesn't accept the blemishes, and that's why he loses in that situation. However, the Gemara says, Ad shelo tesaris, let's say he brings evidence that even before the erisin, she had the blemishes, so then Hamid Haguf al Chezkaso lo ikol meimar. So now she doesn't have that chazaka that she has a presumption that she was unblemished before the erisin, because he has evidence that she was blemished before the erisin. So therefore, according to that, if you can't say that, so ma'ika, so what is there? What chazak is there? Chazaka de'ein adam shosa bekos el imkein bodko. The only chazaka that we really have against him is that a person doesn't drink from a cup unless he inspects it, and therefore v'hayra v'nefayesu, and therefore he saw it and he must be appeased. That's the chazaka that we have against him. But the Gemara says, Adarabba, but on the contrary, that one gets cancelled out. Chazaka ein adam mefayes b'mumin, because there's also a chazaka, a person is not appeased when it comes to blemishes, and therefore in that situation, v'hamid maman al chezkaso. Therefore we're going to say that the money stays with its chazaka, it stays with the husband, and he doesn't have to pay the ksuba money in that situation. And the Gemara continues with another answer to answer the contradiction within the Mishnah. Rav Ashi says, Reisha, in the Reisha of the Mishnah, where we're talking about a situation where it is still at the time of erisin, that the husband and the wife are having this dispute in terms of when she had the blemish. So there, mana le'aba biyadcha, there really, the claim is there's a mana that belongs to my father in your possession, meaning she's not the one that's going to collect the money. It's really the father. Her father's going to collect the money because we're still at the stage of erisin, and therefore in that situation, her chazak is not going to help her father to collect the money. The seifa, however, at the end of the Mishnah case, where we're talking about a situation where they're already married, there she's the one that's collecting the ksuba money. So mana li biyadcha, she's saying you have a mana of mine in your possession. She's collecting for herself, and there her chazaka enables her to collect. Rashi over here says, Rav Ashi Amar Mahader Nami L'ukma Kula Rabbi Gamliel. Rav Ashi as well is trying to say the entire Mishnah is like Rabbi Gamliel, the chazaka de gufa adifa, that her chazaka that she has regarding her body, that she was unblemished, that is better, that is a stronger chazaka, and it's able to take money away from him. However, v'reisha l'hachi lo mahanya chazaka de gufa, but in the reish of the Mishnah, why does her chazaka not help to allow to collect the ksuba? L'fi she'ein hatayna shala, because she's not really collecting for herself. The claim is not hers. Elo shalavia, rather it's her father's claim. Shaksubas erisin la'av, because the principle is that the ksuba at the time of the erisin, it doesn't get paid to the wife, it gets paid to the father. V'havale mana li abba biyadcha, therefore it's a mana that belongs to my father that's in your possession. V'gabeyav lo amrinan beguf shelo detani chezkasa, and therefore when it comes to the father collecting the money, her chazaka is not going to help the father to collect. And the Gemara continues, Eisvei Rav Acha b'reider Rav Avya Rav Ashi, Rav Acha b'reider Rav Avya asked Rav Ashi the following question from a Tosefta. It says, Moder Rabbi Meir b'mumin haru'uyin lavo imam mibeis avia. Rabbi Meir would admit, let's say it's talking about a blemish that could have been there from the time she was in her father's house. By those kind of mumin, sha'al ha'av l'havi raya. Even though normally the husband would have to bring the proof in a situation where she was already married, but with these kind of mumin, then the father has to bring the proof. And so the Gemara asks, V'amai, why should this be true? Mana li biyadchu, if they're already married, she's the one claiming the mana, and as we said, she should be the one that should be able to collect the ksuva because of the chazaka of her guf. Rashi over here says, Mod Rabbi Meir Garcina B'Tosefta, Afagav de Omar, Even though Rabbi Meir said before that when she enters the rishus of the husband, once she's already married, the husband is the one that has to bring the raya. Really, he has to pay the ksuba unless he brings a raya that she had the mum earlier. But modehu b'mumin haru'in lavo ima v'chulo. However, if you have a situation where it was a blemish that was fit to have happened earlier, to have happened while she was in her father's house, now suddenly, even though normally the husband has to bring the proof, now suddenly the father has to bring the proof in order to collect the ksuba money. Now, what does this mean that it was a blemish that could have been from earlier? Because right now we think when we're asking the question, about any mum where there's even a possibility that it happened during the time in the father's house, now suddenly the burden is upon him to bring the evidence. The father has to bring the evidence, even though she's already married, she's in the rishus of the Baal. Normally we say the Baal has to bring the evidence in order to get out of paying the ksuba money. Now all of a sudden, the father has to bring the evidence to collect the ksuba money. And so the Gemara says, why should that be true? Again, if she's already married, she's the one claiming and she has a chazaka. So again, we should say that the body's chazaka, that should win out. And so therefore, the Gemara answers, the Gemara says, no, this Tosefta is talking, biyaseris. We're talking about a kind of mum where she has an extra limb. Rashi over here says biyaseris, etzba yaseris, let's say she has an extra finger. That's impossible to have happened after the erisin. Therefore, in that particular mum, in that particular situation, the husband actually does have the upper hand, even though they're married, and so it's the father that would have to bring the evidence. But the Gemara says, Yaseris, once again, if it's an extra limb, my raya maisi, what possible evidence could the father even bring? Of course this was something that she had from birth. The father can't bring any evidence. Of course the husband is going to win this case. And the Gemara says, no, not of course. Raya de Rav and Efayasu. The father could bring a proof that the husband knew about it and that he was okay with it. And if he's able to bring evidence to that effect, then in such a situation, he or she would be able to collect the ksuba money. And the Gemara continues at the Tudat. Samar Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, Hamachlif para b'chamor. Let's say you have a situation where two people, they're doing an exchange. One person is giving over his cow and he's exchanging it to the other person for the other person's donkey. Now, the way it works is that the moment one of the parties takes possession of the other party's animal, so then automatically his animal transfers back to the other party. So you have the situation where they're doing a kinyan chalipin. Umashach balachamor es apara. Now the person who owned the donkey, the balachamor, he pulls the para, and at the moment he pulls the para, his chamor should transfer ownership to the Baal HaPara. Now the Baal HaPara doesn't have a chance to pull the donkey, to take possession of the donkey, until the donkey dies, meaning the donkey dies before the Baal HaPara ever gets it. And so now the Baal HaPara wants to say there was not a kinyan at all. Nothing happened. It actually died before the kinyan chalipin was ever made. But the Baal HaChamor is saying, no, the kinyan is effective. At the time that I pulled the para, the chamor was still alive, and therefore you own the chamor, but now the chamor has died, and you have lost out. So in this case, in this dispute, who's the one who has to bring the evidence? So he says, Al Bala Chamor L'Havi Raya. It's the owner of the Chamor, the Bala Chamor, the one who did the Meshicha and the Para. He has to bring the proof, Shahaya Chamoro Kayim B'Shas Meshichas Para, that his donkey was alive at the time of the Meshicha. In other words, we assume, before he brings any evidence, we assume that there was no kinyan over here. We assume the Chamor already died, and the Bala Chamor has to bring a proof otherwise. The Bala Chamor has to bring a proof that his Chamor was actually alive and that there actually was a kinyan. And the Gemara continues, Vitana Tuna Kala, and this Tana, he's basing it on the case of a Kala, on the case of a bride. And the Gemara says, Hi Kala, well, what case of the bride is this similar to? Ilema, if you're going to say, we'll take a look at Rashi over here. Umashach bala chamor es apara v'chamor haya bebeis balav. The chamor is still in the house of its owner at the time of the Meshicha. Utnan bekidushin kol hanase damim ba'achar kevan shezach hazeh shemashach echad mehem nischayev chaver ba'onse chalipin b'chol makom shein. Like we said, at the moment of the Meshicha of the para, assuming the chamor is alive, that kinyan is going to be affected. And Rashi continues, at shamesa chamor, again the chamor died. Ze omer ad shalom mashachtas parasi meis chamorcha. This one says no, it died before the kinyan ever got started. There was no kinyan. Well, the Mason, it was your animal that died. V'zeomer, the other one says, no, mishum hashachti meis, I did the kinyan already, and then it died. Ukvar kanahu lach, it was already yours, and it's your loss. B'tana tuna kala, tana damasnis, and da'ayri b'mumei kala misayili. What he was saying was, meaning Shmuel was saying, the Tana supports what I'm saying. The Tana of our Mishnah that talks about the blemishes of a kala, that supports my position that it's actually the Baal HaChamor, the one who was pulling the para, he's the one that has to bring evidence that this was a good kinyan. And then the Gemara said, Hi Kala, Hi Milsa Damasis and Messiah. What part of our Mishnah is a proof to Shmuel? And so the Gemara is going to say on the next Talmud, Ilema Kala Bevesavi. If you're going to say it comes from the case where the Kala is still in her father's house, meaning to say they didn't get married yet, and now they're arguing over what time, at what point in time the blemish happened. And so we said that in such a situation where she's in her father's house, so we said that it's actually the father that has to bring the proof that he's entitled to the ksuba. Reisha Damasis and Shabo Ladin Ba'oda Arusa, again, she's still in Arusa, and they come to the court. To Katani Ha'av Tzarech Lavi Raya. What does it say over there? The father's the one that has to bring the proof that the blemish happened after they already had the Erisin. Usvira leila Shmuel Reb Elazar demuki law betrei Tanoi. Now Shmuel's going to hold like Reb Elazar that says that actually there's two different Tanoim in the Mishnah. There's two different opinions. They contradict one another within the Mishnah. Ve'afilu nichnas al chuppah. Now, if you're going to say like that, there really is no distinction. It would even be true. Let's say there was already a chuppah. Let's say they were already married, and she was in the rishus of the father, the rishus of the husband rather. That would be true as well. Again, the Mishnah is contradictory because it's following different Tanoim. But according to the one Tana who says that the father has to bring the proof, that would be true. The same thing would be true if she's already married. The father would have to bring the proof even in a situation where she is in the possession, so to speak, of the husband, where she's already married. Even though that suffix didn't happen in his rishus, even though that suffix happened when she was already married, still the father has to bring the proof. Alma eino gova mammon misafik. What's the point? Comes out according to the Mishnah. If you understand the Mishnah that way, that shita, you're not allowed to collect money from a doubt situation. You have a doubtful situation over here when the mum happened, and the father cannot collect the ksuba money without bringing a proof. And the same would be true over here. He's trying to say the kinyan worked, and he wants to take the cow of his friend and say that his chamor was alive. He can't do that. Now, even though the suffix, it really took place in the rishus of his friend, because the Mashiach has already happened, but still, if you're trying to take the paras chavero, you're not able to do it misafik, you're going to have to bring a raya. That's why, maybe you'll say that's why the Mishnah is a support. We'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ayin Vav Amud Beis.